there, I'm Eddie Redmayne, and I'm in the new film The Theory of Everything, which opens on the 14th of November here in Chicago. Thanks for having me, Red Eye.
I know there was a lot of pressure and stress on you because of what an undertaking this was. Can you tell me maybe if there's an untold story about like a nightmare that you had, or just the way that the stress was really weighing on you?
Oh God, well, where to start? I can write you a book of those stories. No, I suppose the worst for me was the night before we started filming, because we weren't shooting chronologically. You would have to.
Right.
I was jumping into different physicalities within different days, and our first week's filming was the exteriors in Cambridge, so we were shooting at Cambridge University. And on our first day filming, the first scene was actually the scene that's in the poster. So they're young and he's healthy and footloose and fancy free. And then at lunchtime, I was on 2 walking sticks, and then in the evening, in the second wheelchair. And so that was, on one day, it was putting all of those broad strokes of what the physicality was down. And I was so anxious the night before that it got to like 4 a.m. and I still wasn't asleep. And there's like melatonin, and I was going, do I take a sleeping, like what do I? But then I'm being picked up at 5, and then I'll just be completely groggy, and I was having a complete meltdown. And in the end, it was the only night of my life in which I've not slept like at all.
You pulled an all-nighter before.
I pulled an all-nighter before starting. And I was having, but weirdly, one of the scenes was quite emotional. And I wonder whether, like, the fact that I was so exhausted meant that it was easier to kind of access that. But
I feel like you should have taken some high school exams or something after pulling an all-nighter.
I know, it's a depressing state of affairs.
So you've never had this experience like on a different film with preparation that way, then?
I mean, I've prepped in different ways. Les Mis was months of vocal coaching and trying to get those muscles working in order to be able to sustain them. And that's the interesting thing about making films. It's not about doing one take. It was the same with the physicality in this. You have to, as you were saying, being able to sustain it over a wee period. And every job comes with its challenges. But this one's something about playing someone who is an icon but who's living, and who you know will see and judge the film. That just made it. There was just that extra sort of weight, I suppose.
Of course, you wanted to get this as right as possible, and you met Steven, and you knew that if nothing else, you would know what was right and he would know what was right. But was there ever a thought in your mind that many viewers actually sort of, if you were doing something that wasn't right on or that was kind of inauthentic, like there are a lot of viewers that probably wouldn't even know?
Well, I mean, so one of the major challenges of the whole film for me was this idea that you want to be authentic to Stephen and Jane and their family. You want to be absolutely true to the science. Having met all these people suffering from ALS, you want to be completely true to the disease, whilst at the same time choosing aspects of Stephen's life and modifying things to make it a film and to make it so that all of those things weighed, and at moments you think, oh, maybe I could just, but actually the truth is always so much more interesting, and particularly in the physicality and those sorts of things, it was and being able to witness that and then bring it into the set was pretty. It's much more interesting than faking it, really.
So, just going back to the notion of the pressure that was put on your body as you were in this role, like after a take, or if you were done for an hour or something, did you find yourself like standing up and kind of shaking yourself out at all, or what was that like?
You have to be a wee bit careful jumping out of it, because if you're in those positions for a long time, you can sort of dislodge stuff if you
oh, really?
Jump out. Yeah, but so it was more about just sort of easing it. But the weird thing was just that I found almost most complicated was breathing when you're in those, because it was about controlling things like the breath pattern and blinking and like eye movements and those sorts of things. So there was but what was amazing about film is it sees it all. Cameras coming close, and so all of these muscles, which I basically never used before starting prep, and basically just sitting in front of a mirror and trying to activate muscles that Stephen uses that I had never used. All of that was riveting to me. It was really interesting.
Were you ever so deep into it that you almost had to remind yourself, like, how do I usually do this?
I do find it interesting that I'm not a method actor, but aspects tend to. It tends to be my girlfriend who will point out those physical elements that remain with a character. And
Like what?
In this, it was just hand stuff. Actually, the hands became a really important transition for me, and she would just notice that the way that I moved my hands would slightly alter, and then you a month or three after the film, it sort of goes again. But no, it's I try to have a bath at the end of each day and just like literally wash the character off and get ready for the next day.
As you said recently that you're never happier than when you're in the bath, actually, and Max Iron said something like that too.
Did he?
What is it with English guys and baths?
I don't know. I really don't know. It's just like it's a time for thought and for like contemplation and. But I mean it as far as like with characters. When you're playing characters, often you have makeup on you, and even if you've cleaned that off at the end of the day, and there's wig glue and there's all this stuff, and somehow just getting in the bath and just I don't know. It's a very cleansing experience. I don't know. We're weird. I apologise for the Brits. We're very odd.
Well, it seems like you're your own worst critic and have had trouble seeing yourself in the past, or like you only see what's wrong. Is it any different when you watch this? Feeling like you got
No, do you know what? It's actually worse because on this, I had all these documentaries of Stephen on an iPad, and you would do all the work, but a lot of it would involve you by yourself in front of a mirror with the iPad, really replicating some of his mannerisms and his character. And on this film, because we were shooting out of sequence, James, the director, allowed me to see all the rushes, so all the dailies, and in order to be able to trace the performance. And ultimately, I suppose, some mad place in your mind, you hope that you can get to absolutely believing that you are that person, but ultimately each day I'd be comparing the sort of the dailies to the footage, and you never quite meet it. So it's ultimately hugely frustrating. But one of the great aspects of it for me was that after seeing the film, Stephen gave us his voice, and we'd used this approximation whilst filming it, and somehow using just the slight difference in timbre when we used his voice, just for me that elevated something, and that made me I found it really moving. That it was inching towards getting closer to him.
You said recently that you found the more confident people are in their own intellect, the less they kind of show it off.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you can give an example of a time when people really are not confident and seem to show it off.
Well, I'm myself all the time. But no, a lot of the people I was at Cambridge with, when you're young particularly as well, like when you're trying to work stuff out and trying to push your mind to study at levels that you haven't done before. I think I think a lot of life is play acting at sort of aspiring to levels above what we can do. But there seems to be, with those great minds, a sort of innate confidence that's always kind of intriguing to me.
For most people, if they learned a new word on their calendar that morning, it's like, I'm going to use it in conversation
Definitely,
today.
and I often use it incorrectly. Yeah, it's exactly.
Because of Stephen's interest in kind of probability in a little way, I thought it would be fun to play a little probability game.
Wowza.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, just tell me how probable you think the following things are.
Okay.
That you go on vacation before the end of the year.
10.
That the Chicago Cubs win the World Series in the next 5 years.
I'm so ignorant, I'm going to go 10.
Yes. That is great news. That the United States legalizes marijuana in the next decade.
3.
That you would ever adopt a farm animal.
7.
Which one?
Probably a horse.
Really?
Yeah. I learnt to horse ride for a film once because I lied about riding, and so they sent me off to horse camp, so I quite enjoy riding.
How about the probability that you would ever play a baby?
I don't know, maybe the 3 Men and a Baby. I love that film, but that's a voice, so that probably doesn't actually count.
I guess it would.
Although I've got this new thing called like My Pet, like an app in which you like basically animate your pet, and maybe there's a baby equivalent of that. So maybe in my own world, I could animate a baby face. Let's go on to the next one.
So that sounds like a 5 then.
That sounds like a 5. Yeah.
Appear in a Tyler Perry movie.
Oh God, I'm maybe a 5, if you'd have me.
Win an Oscar.
Oh God, A zero, an aspirational zero.
I think that was it for the probability. You were awesome at that. Thank you. If we had a chalkboard here and I asked you to like write down a bunch of the elaborate kind of math and physics stuff that you're doing early in the movie, how good would you be at that?
I'm just checking to see if there are any chalkboards that I can see that there's something going to get pulled out. I did learn to. There's a big scene of me writing stuff, and I did learn it. I spent sort of weeks learning it, but the hilarity is that I understood not a single ounce of it, even though one of the students had tried to explain it to me. And when I remember saying to him, no. He would start with terms like space-time. I was like, no. Imagine I'm literally 6 years old. give the 6-year-old version. So I don't think I'd be that nimble now, but there was a time. Are you going to put out a
shouldn't
chalkboard?
Turn over this piece of paper? Please, no.
Provided you go into close-up.
Okay.
And I still wasn't asleep, and there's like melatonin, and I was going, do I take a sleeping, like what do I, but then I'm being picked up at 5, and then I'll just be completely groggy, and I was having a complete meltdown, and in the end, it was the only night of my life in which I've not slept, like, at all, like,
you pulled an all-nighter before
I pulled an
starting to
all-nighter
shoot.
before starting, and I was having, but weirdly, one of the scenes was quite emotional.
Maybe if there's an untold story about like a nightmare that you had, or just the way that the stress was really weighing on you.
Oh God! Well, where to start? I can write you a book of those stories. No, I suppose the worst for me was the night before we started filming, because we weren't shooting chronologically. You would have to.
Right.
I was jumping into different physicalities within different days, and our first week's filming was the exteriors in Cambridge, so we were shooting at Cambridge University, and I wonder whether like the fact that I was so exhausted meant that it was easier to kind of access that. But
I feel like you should have taken some high school exams or something after pulling an all-nighter.
I know, it's a depressing state of affairs.
So you've never had this experience like on a different film with preparation that way then?
I mean, I've prepped in different ways. Les Mis was months of vocal coaching and trying to get. Hey there, I'm Eddie Redmayne, and I'm in the new film The Theory of Everything, which opens on the 14th of November here in Chicago. Thanks for having me, Red Eye.
I know there was a lot of pressure and stress on you because of what an undertaking this was. Can you tell me?
And on our first day filming, the first scene was actually the scene that's in the poster. So they're young and he's healthy and footloose and fancy free. And then at lunchtime, I was on 2 walking sticks, and then in the evening, in the second wheelchair. And so that was, on one day, it was putting all of those broad strokes of what the physicality was down. And I was so anxious the night before that it got to like 4 in the morning.